I am Everly is the narrative of my husband's belief he could outwit me. Dark, bank transactions I never conducted, and a name, Tegan, I had never heard before. Husband was not just going to be leaving me, intended to get everything. I would fall. Week later, terrible was not just the betrayal. Been planning it for what length of time? Lied how many times? Distances he was prepared to go, to wipe me out. Bed when I woke up was empty. To me, indicated Maximus had been gone for some time. Assumed maybe he had gone to get a drink of water or the restroom. Words faintly as I sat up wiping the sleep from my eyes. Corridor lamp was out. Shadows on the floor were created by a sliver of moonlight coming through the window. Sound. My stomach turned. Little bit more. Now she doesn't suspect anything. Breath choked. If he were gently soothing someone. Ribs. My heart hammered. Devil was he chatting to? Hear more, but the words that followed muffled. His voice sank almost above a whisper. Fingers twisted into fists. Was no late-night call for work. Calls. Really gave a damn if I listened to his talks before. Head flew over options, each one less than the next. Few seconds later, I heard his feet coming. Turned around the corner, I hardly had time to sprint back the bedroom. Pulse pounded as I crawled between the blankets, feigning slumber. Second later, I felt the bed sink. Weight changed next to me, yet I maintained consistent breathing. Few minutes later, he breathed gently, calm, as if nothing had occurred. At him. Voice sounded like I had just woke up. Soft, sleepy. Bathroom, he murmured quickly without thinking. Not a lie. Regarding the phone call as well? All. Client. Had to straighten some information for a case. For any hint of doubt. At me, as usual inscrutable. Was overdosing on analysis. Was really job. Now she doesn't suspect anything. Made myself turn over after swallowing the lump in my throat. Mind was screaming at me. I got up before Maximus early the following morning. Asleep, his arm hung over the cushion where my head ought to have been. Got out of bed, picked up my phone, and walked barefoot to the kitchen. Bank accounts not too often. The money, and I had never really thought about it. Was something felt strange. Sales. Gut became tighter. 122, 7 and 50. Had $2,000. 12 withdrawals throughout the last 3 months. Little yet often enough to cause concern. Maximus and I split the bills, home loan, facilities, ingredients. For personal expenses, however, we kept separate accounts. These exchanges were not for bills, investments, or anything we had discussed. Clearly, not for anything. I inhaled weakly, my fists clenching around my phone. I listened behind me for footsteps. I shut my computer fast, then turned to see Maximus rubbing his neck against the doorway. "Morning," he murmured, voice heavy with sleep. "Breakfast is what is on hand." I put my phone down. I was going to ask you exactly the same question. Smoking, he moved ahead to make himself coffee. "I suppose your turn comes first." I watched him drink, his free hand laid on the counter. This morning, I went over our financial account. Maximus halted for half a second. Just long enough. He tightened his hold on the cup and then started to laugh, and many little withdrawals are involved here. I opened my arms. Things I am not familiar with. He hardly stopped, just few expenditures. Prospects, cup, provide cause for concern. All short-term benefits are like that. He was resting here. I knew this. I simply had no idea why. I struggled to shake the discomfort all through the remainder of the day. Maximus wasn't assisting, however. He was fixed on his phone, answering calls in the other room. He positioned his screen on the table, facing down constantly. And each time I glanced at him, I felt as if we were separated by some wall, one hitherto absent from the scene. My thoughts would not calm down that night as I laid in bed looking at the ceiling. Maximus had always been sure. Perfect. A guy able to negotiate anything with his words. Still, I had spent enough time with him to recognize when anything was amiss. And there was clearly something amiss. Turned to stare at him. Sleeping already. Breathing consistent. Faces still. Guy with nothing to conceal. Words I had been trying to ignore all day crept into my thoughts. Behavior suspicious? Wrong here? The uncertainty persisted even as dawn light poured through my window. Unable to get the sensation that something was badly wrong gone, I had spent the whole night twisting and turning. I still could hear Maximus's voice from the evening before. Informational. Rejective. Still measured, however. The tone someone employed while they were concealing something clearly visible. Daily ritual, but my motions seemed mechanical. Mind ran in circles, revisiting every exchange and every red sign I had passed during the last 3 months, kitchen looking just as nothing had happened. Temple quickly, definitely arrange our finances, I was thinking, in case of a disaster. Coffee cup, I mimicked precisely. Indeed, he replied, leaning against the counter and drinking his coffee, as this seemed to be just another everyday exchange. Like, do you have your whole account list right now? Passkeys? Property? Such sort of material? Everything need to be kept in one spot. I looked at him, my pulse pounding in my ears. Maximus had never shown any interest in my personal affairs. Yes, we kept our personal money separate even though we had a joint account for payments. That was just how we had always done it. I swallowed, projecting a blank look. I mean, I could probably throw something together. His lips opened to a little grin, yet his eyes flicked only for a moment. He nodded, as like it were no great problem, then switched the topic totally. But my head was whirling already. This has not to do with us. This has nothing to do with except in case of crisis. Maximus was get ready for something, and whatever it was, he wanted me not to notice it approaching. Maximus was very laid back that evening. He laughed at the TV, browsed his phone as like nothing was happening, and even offered to recommend ordering takeaway. He was acting just precisely like a loving spouse, and it is the reason my skin crawled. Something had changed in him, his gait, his speech pattern, all too simple, too well practiced. And then it occurred. Maximus left his phone on the sofa table when he got up to shower. He never left his phone running wild, always. My pulse accelerated as I focused on it. Been for many weeks, the screen was facing down. Notice flashed the screen as if the world were tossing me a lifeline. A message using text messaging, name I came across not familiar. Consider. Grabbed for the phone and slanted the screen just enough to see the message preview. Dark. Breath stuttered, chest constricted so quickly it ached. Room seemed smaller at once, like if the walls were squeezing in on me. Devil was Peter? And practically speaking, what did they mean? Second, my fingertips floated over the screen, just long enough to let the craziest ideas blossom in my head. Maximus was supposed to be leaving me. Water stop. Sofa, panic racing through me as I put the phone back precisely where it had been. Knees to prevent trembling of the hands. Minute later, Maximus walked back into the room, towel drying his hair. Made myself turn to face him, so quiet, so at ease, totally oblivious to the fact I had just witnessed something I wasn't meant to. Hair. To swallow hard. He reached for his phone without looking twice. With little effort, was nothing to cause concern about. But later on, I knew better. Make sense of what I had seen, not what I assumed. Business partner's coworker. In the dark was about something utterly different, benign. Knew better. Component was clicking individually, then another. Silence. The money vanished. The call in middle of the night. Way he became suddenly rather fascinated with my finances. Have faced him straight away. And then. Was correct, however. I needed evidence because Maximus was really concealing something this significant. Evidence. Mouth. Let him kiss me goodnight. Let him go beneath the blankets as if nothing were wrong. I then laid there clutching my phone and spoke into the darkness. Tegan is who the hell? The question still tormented me, chewing at every idea the following morning. Through my morning ritual, ghostly, following the motions. Head was fixed on one item. Name stayed in my head like an unresolved riddle, a piece that neither fit nor refused to be overlooked. Ease. Maximus sat across from me at breakfast and was browsing his phone. Asked him if he knew what I had seen in that message. Was a very excellent actor, and grinned as if feeling my mistrust. Coffee? Sure what sign to use? Keeping a light voice, I asked. Sliding a paper across the table, he remarked, just some financial updates for tax reasons. Although his voice was laid back, his fingers tapped the table in an inconsistent cadence. Tell a tell. I grabbed the papers and skimming the first page made my gut knot. Legal language permeated the paper, but one thing seemed very obvious. Taxes have nothing to do with this. I turned to study the final page. Agreement about property transfer? My ears heard my pulse hammer. My riches, my funds include the unit as well. Everything would go under his name. I pushed myself to search above. Maximus was observing me, his face painted in a cautious grin. "Maximus," I replied, my voice too under control. "What is this?" His grin was constant. "It's only a precaution, sweetheart. A legal benefit. Not a thing changes between us." I fixed him, my hand tightening around the page. "Nothing shifts. You beg me to sign over everything to you." "Not everything," he said fluidly, as if that would improve things. "Just grouping items for security. You know, should things go wrong." My hands quivered just a little, not from hate or from fear. This no longer amounted to paranoia. This was not me interpreting events. This was in mind. And he had the galacity to sit across from me and like it was nothing. I slowly and deliberately put the paper back on the table. I then turned to meet his eye. "I will not be signing this." His grin twitched. His jaw tightened for a split second before he laughed shortingly. "Everly, try not to be theatrical. Basically, it's paperwork." I stayed firm. "Why then are you so ready for me to sign without reading it?" His expression became stiffer. "You really do not want to do this, Everly." He bent in slightly, his voice under control. Benevolent beneath it, however, was a warning, a menace. I looked at him, uncompromising. "Is it a hazard?" Maximus responded slowly at first. Rather, he slanted back in his chair, arms folded, his face changing to become dangerously inscrutable. Smile he had wore years ago vanished, replaced by a disturbing quiet. Voice too measured, too calm. "You're making this harder than it should be." Face blank and swallowed my wrath. Believed he was in charge, that I was only another move on his well-drawn-out chessboard. Stillness linger, seeing him as his fingers aimlessly tapped the table, the little quiver in his jaw as I ignored his response. Waiting for me to get emotional, to panic, to shatter. Not bring him the pleasure, enough to cause him to shift uneasily. "What, Maximus?" I murmured softly, got up, and started collecting the docs. "You're correct. I need to give this some thought." His eyes narrowed slightly. That was not what he was anticipating. Already turned aside, headed to the kitchen and laid the papers orderly on counter. To quarrel. Not yet. Now I was the one in control. Evening as if nothing had occurred. Still just another happy couple, he went about our house, getting himself a drink, watching the news, browsing through his phone while he seemed not to be trying to deceive me into signing away all I had. But as I observed him, a weight of awareness dropped into my chest. This had never been about preserving our marriage. He was not attempting to correct anything. He was getting ready to go, and when he departed, he wanted to carry everything with him. I discovered him in the living room drinking his coffee in the following morning, seemingly free from any concern at all. Looked up when I sat across from him and sensed something had changed right away. "Cup, we must discuss." I lowered my head. He sighed as if he were the only one finding it tough. "We should split, in my opinion." And there it was. He stated it like a guy giving a well-practiced speech, every syllable well calculated. "It is no longer functioning," he said, his voice even. "You really have to watch this." I fixed my gaze on him, unwavering. He had no demand for a divorce. He was reporting to me that it was occurring. I let one pulse pass, then another. Then I spoke at last. "You have been organizing this, have you not?" Something passed his face, gone before I could identify it. "Is for the best. We no longer live close by. Divisible." He was planning something like this. I slanted forward, laying my arms over the table. "You mean you're looking for out?" "You want to be sure, however, that you don't walk away empty-handed." He didn't deny it. His lips pushed into a narrow line. I could have let out a yell. I could have, across the room, hurled the closest thing. But I didn't because something had changed inside of me, a steel will not previously existent. I so reclined in my chair, slightly slanted head. Then, as coolly as I could, I said the words that would transform everything, belongings, around. His breath caught. Not enough for another person to find, but I did. Mean what you mean? His voice was too exact, too under control. I grinned deliberately, slowly, just exactly what it sounds like. His mouth shut. That is what I noticed then. The second he understood, he had lost. He had spent months planning this, arranging every little element to guarantee his success. He had, however, undervalued me, and he loathed it as well. We sat in a lengthy quiet and got to his feet. Coffee, slow sipped it, then turned to face me with a gaze that chilled me. He started smiling again. Still, this was colder than usual. Computes. Everly, you will come to repent this. She couldn't tell whether it was a desperate bluff or a threat. She was ready in any case. Maximus had turned around now after playing his hand. Moving through my ritual, the early air seemed heavier than normal. Coffee tasted bad, and the apartment's quiet weight weighed on me. I reminded myself I wouldn't let the words from the previous evening to control me. Then, however, came the door knock. Strong, evaluated. Officials. I placed down my coffee, inhaled, then opened it. On the opposite side stood a guy wearing a blue jacket clutching big envelope. Envelope. Been fed. Fingers closed around the paperwork. Weight of the envelope seemed more than it ought to have. Find out what it was without opening it. Sit at the kitchen table, breathing strongly, then slipping my nail under the flap and drawing papers out. Be dissolved. I ran over the page, glancing at the financial requirements. Simply walking off of everything. Motor vehicle, percent arrogance, spousal support. Head and laughed bitterly. Handle anything. Been organizing this for possibly months, maybe years. Guy I wed was icy, was computed. My attorney, the air smelled newly printed papers and polished wood. Pages, almost controlling a smile when she arrived to the financial collapse. She tapped her nails on the desk, then said, brow, manner, peek up, entertained. As such, application, you put everything under a trust. Access, argue for spousal support given your economic background relative to his. Occurring, shoulders at last releasing the strain I had been dragging around since that knock on my door. Felt really under control for the first time in many weeks. Maximus had spent all this time believing he was the one directing the game. Undervalued me. As I was finishing pouring a glass of wine that evening, the front door banged open. I seldom flinches either. Maximus stood there, waves of resentment pouring from him. I swear I heard his teeth grind. His tie was unfastened and his mouth was tightly closed. Be quite clever? Voice was razor-sharp and poisonous. Whined slowly, enjoying the way his wrath spun around him like a hurricane. I'm at last shielding myself. Hands clenched into fists at his sides. Planning this, glass slanted head. Other. Last, he exhaled hard, darkening his eyes as he said, "This isn't over." Measured breath. Though the war had barely started, I had won the first fight. Lost his financial hold on me, I had a little sensation of relief, first in weeks. Have known better than to believe he would go peacefully. Showing up at work. Typical passing looks, but persistent looks. Second, I went inside the room. Office around mid-morning. Know something. I turned from my laptop, a rumor floating around. Said nothing, but she drifted off wringing her hands. Marcus paused, then let out a sigh. From your shared accounts and were... She gasped hard, laundered money. I. Words fell. What? Believing it, started chatting to people. Close pals. Dispersion of the narrative gut turned upside down, rage blazing in my chest. Then simply money, working to destroy me. Was hardly keeping it together by the time I arrived to see my attorney. To end. Currently! With hands quivering with fury, I slapped the stack of printed screenshots onto the desktop. Lawyer, looked at them and laughed dryly. Very definitely desperate, however, is denigrating me. Make use of it. In her chair and tapped her pen on the desk. Inviting defamation charges if he is going around fabricating allegations. Cease and desist, serious if he dismisses it. Mouth tightly. Want this not to be dragged out before courts. Said, I want him to quit. Amara exhaled. He's aiming at baiting you, Everly. He want you to respond emotionally. Turned to see Mark standing at the entrance, staring knowingly. Allow him choose your next action. and he prevails. Was boiling for a battle, going to acquire one. Of the most luxurious restaurants in the city, LaRue was where I found him laughing over cocktails with two co-workers, to boil when I saw him seated there, utterly unconcerned, like he hadn't spent the previous several days dragging my name over the dirt. Was no scenario created by me. Not yell. I had no need of it. You have no clue what you have just begun. I just stepped over to the table, bent down, and said. Maximus's smirk wavered for a single second before he covered it with a simple smile. Eyes shining with challenge, he cleaned his lips with a tissue. Let us see what you have then. I had warned him one more final time. I was done acting fair now. Maximus had worked for weeks attempting to dominate, threaten, and manipulate me. Stage he had undervalued me. Firing one last shot now, having missed my money and smeared my reputation. Deadly guy in desperation. Phone rang midway through my morning coffee. Need before she even spoke. Come in, my attorney said without prelude. Moved for a complete financial examination. The words shocked my body like hell. Coffee gently and inhaled deeply. Saying you owe him a cash settlement and misused common finances is entirely ridiculous. It is not the point here. Drain me. Not going to win, he tries to tire me down. Just as exactly. Chest, played to win outright. Wear out his rival. Time. I replied then and would be there in 1 hour. Amara already had Maximus's gestures scattered over her desk, marked in red by the time I entered her office. She remarked, looking up, Here is the great news. He does not have one piece of credible proof. The unfortunate news is, if the judge approves of his strategies, this may still stretch on for weeks, perhaps months. I put my hands tightly together. Our following action should be, we counterfile and ask for a straight dismissal, she stated. If the court finds this a delay tactic, we also demand that he cover all legal expenses. I graced a smile. Do it. Weeks later, I was in a courtroom seated across from Maximus. Was neat, his tie slightly too tight, and his smile hardly hidden. This seemed to him as his moment. Stand was his attorney. Client has cause to think Mrs. Maximus shifted assets incorrectly in order to evade a reasonable divorce settlement. Asking for a complete forensic review of every prior 6-month financial transaction. Didn't reply. Honor. Every financial transaction my client made occurred prior to Mr. Maximus's divorce application. Thick binder. Is obviously an effort at financial harassment. We also ask that Mr. Maximus pay all legal expenses and that this move be rejected with prejudice. Judge went slowly over the papers, their face inscrutable. Room was quiet and charged, for me to squirm. Gratification from him. At last, the judge raised his head. The court determines no basis for a comprehensive financial audit. One denies motion. Moreover, lack of proof will make Mr. Maximus liable for any legal expenses connected to this claim. A sudden gavel clap. Maximus had lost once more, just like that. Maximus passed me silent outside the courthouse. Loud enough for me to hear as he passed, however. Be over? Round I had won, but I knew. Final action remaining. Not go silently. Let loss rule. Return with something far worse. Then Maximus? He had been planning this far too long to let it finish here. Found out his last action right away without waiting long. Following morning, the call arrived. Have a dilemma. Phone more tightly. Was a stop. Sound of paper shuffling then, with financial fraud. On their data, you have been fabricating financial records for months. Air seemed to depart my lungs. Charge be accepted. I would not only lose money. Find myself let go.